infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Harriman.
Well, hey everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Now, chronic wasting disease, or CWD, is a prion disease that affects several cervid species, like deer and elk and moose. It's been found in many areas of North America, including 3 provinces in Canada and at least 26 states. Now, my guest today has expressed concern that it is probable that human cases of CWD associated with the consumption of contaminated meat will be documented in the years ahead. This has prompted the Center for Infectious Disease Research and Policy, or CIDRAP, at the University of Minnesota to launch the Chronic Wasting Disease Response Research and Policy Program. So joining me today is the director of CIDRAP, Michael Osterholm, PhD. Dr. Osterholm, welcome back to the show, sir.
Thank you very much. Good to be back.
So what is chronic wasting disease and how common is it?
Well, chronic wasting disease is part of a large family of transmissible pieces of little protein that, when transmitted, in some cases, the genetic matchup occurs between the person who it's transmitted to or the animal species, then develops what we basically call a transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. Where basically it's a neurologic disease that is a very rapid progressing disease, similar to Alzheimer's, but much more progressive.
Now, as of right now, as far as we know, it's not transmissible to humans. However, you have testified to Minnesota lawmakers and said, and I quote, "It is my best professional judgment based on my public health experience and the risk of BSE transmission to humans in the 80s and 90s, and my extensive review and evaluation of laboratory research studies, that it is probable that human cases of CWD associated with the consumption of contaminated meat will be documented in the years ahead. It is possible that the number of human cases will be substantial and will not be isolated events." I'd like to get your thoughts on that statement.
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just take a step back and say that, again, we're talking about now chronic wasting disease as one of the prion-related diseases we deal with. You may recall that, of course, we had the bovine spongiform encephalopathy, the prion-related disease that occurred in cattle largely in Great Britain and some European countries back beginning really in 1986, with the first human cases showing up in 1996, 10 years later. What we're looking at here is another prion, a different one, but with a very similar kind of concern here in North America, where, as you pointed out, it's been found in 26 states and 3 provinces of Canada. In this case, the transmission is occurring largely in wild animal populations like white-tailed deer, elk, and even to some limited degree in reindeer, as a result of moving infected animals around between game farms for what we call cervid farming. So it hasn't been that these animals have been, on their own going from state to state like we might see with a bird-related migration-associated disease. And so we've got a real challenge there. The problem we're concerned about today is that because of the growing number of wildlife animals that become infected, because these game farms have inadequate fencing to keep these infected animals in, or the wildlife animals such as white-tailed deer get into the farms themselves through inadequate fencing. And then once it's in the wildlife, it spreads within that wildlife population in that area. We in Minnesota have had several situations where we've had game farms that have had positive animals imported into that game farm, have either gotten out or the wild deer got in, and now we've had outbreaks in a limited basis here. Some states like Wisconsin have had thousands and thousands of cases of this in their white-tailed deer once it got started there. Our concern is very similar to what we saw in 1996, was with the transmission then to humans and the actual cases occurring, what happened in the preceding 10 years? Well, between 1986 and 96 in England, there was a lot of debate. Should we do something or not? No, the animal species barrier is there. It won't cross from cattle to humans. And here we are today, and the question is, will this, in fact, ultimately transmit to humans? We estimate that anywhere from 7 to 15,000 individuals last year in the United States ate a chronic wasting disease-infected deer, because in the early stages of this illness, such deer are not able to be looked at and from a standpoint of symptoms to know that they're infected. And so this is what our center is really trying to work on, is how do we deal with the policies here at the animal level, in the wildlife, trying to reduce transmission. How do we help individual hunters make sure that they're not consuming an infected deer? That's largely going to be through the use of testing that yet is not available, but we're going to be advocating for that. And then how do we make sure that over time that we are able to detect human cases if, in fact, they do start to occur associated with this, and what does that mean in terms of what we do for follow-up, looking at a kind of a Creutzfeldt-like disease that might be occurring.
Now, your concern about this, you're definitely not alone on that. In 2017, Canadian officials issued a risk advisory opinion about the potential health risk, and that was based on a Canadian study where CWD was transmitted to macaques. However, last year, an NIH study found quite the opposite, that there was no evidence of transmission to macaques. Love to get your thoughts on these studies.
Yeah, at this point, there really are three different kinds of evidence that one can look at to determine, is the species barrier something that can be crossed? And what these really are actual in vivo or in vitro studies where we actually are challenging different animal species, or lab tests that we look to see if these prions can change and actually become incorporated into a prion, for example, that might otherwise be occurring in a healthy human. And so there's a series of different studies ongoing. At this point, none of them can provide any definitive information, yes or no. What we have, though, is Mother Nature herself has given us the example of what can happen with what we saw with, again, mad cow disease or bovine spongiform encephalopathy. Do any of us know that this will occur here? Absolutely not. But we don't want to wait and find 10 years out that we should have been concerned about it. The Canadian study you referenced here has not been published yet. We surely need those data, and it'll be important to assess what they mean. The NIH study also you have to be a little bit careful about, because, again, one of the things that happens is prions change over time. They mutate to the point of where the kind of prion that we might see from a white-tailed deer is not the same one today that we would have seen 5, 10, 15 years ago. And it's that acclimation process, or that process of basically becoming more like a human specific prion that could cause humans to become infected is our concern. So in this situation, I think both studies are very important. I think they surely provide us with information that we desperately need, but no one right now can give you any data that says, yes, it will or won't be transmitted from these white-tailed deer through consumption of venison to humans. And unfortunately, the only way we're going to know that really is if we actually see human cases, which again points out that we've already failed desperately. So our job is just to keep people from eating chronic wasting disease-infected venison, and how to do that, and at the same time while supporting hunting. Because in a state like ours in Minnesota last year, 200,000 white-tailed deer were killed in the hunting process, which it does a lot to keep the herd size smaller, which then means the density of animals is not the same, which then reduces the likelihood there'll be transmission. So we surely want to have, a very healthy white-tailed deer hunting population in this country.
And I want to go ahead and close out with this. It was announced, a week or two ago that your organization, CIDRAP, will be starting a CWD program. Dr. Osterholm, can you talk about the objectives and the focus of this program?
Yeah, well, thank you. And again, first of all, let me just say the reason we're taking this on is we believe this is a very important and real public health issue. We have a series of goals, 4 major goals for our program. One is to provide coordinated and proactive national leadership with government agencies and others that identifies and defines, priority policy, prevention, research, and community outreach issues. and they all appear, of course, being associated with chronic wasting disease in animals. And we want to do whatever we can to help define its potential for animal to human and human to human transmission. That's number one. So we'll concentrate heavily on that. Number two is to educate the public, particularly hunters and the medical and public health communities, wildlife scientists and managers, public policymakers and elected officials about what do we know about CWD and what is the potential of risk for transmission from animals to humans. The third priority area is to promote extensive, reliable, and rapid CWD prion detection tests for killed cervids before the deer are processed or consumed. Right now, the way for hunters not to consume a prion-positive animal is to have a test that they can use in the field before they ever take it to a slaughtering plant for further processing. We got to know that. And so we need to really work on that kind of testing. And then finally, just really conducting primary prevention research on limiting the potential transmission of the CWD prion to humans and between animal species. What works best to keep any animal species themselves from getting infected, and of course, what works best to keep humans safe. And so with those four priority areas or goals, we're going to do what we can to try to help bring some better understanding to this problem.
Well, very interesting. And again, I want to thank you, Dr. Mike Osterholm, for your time and your expertise, sir. Thank you.
Thanks, Robert. Anytime. You know that. Thank you.